Hello, everyone, and welcome to another special edition of Litter Media Live. I'm your host, Mike Smith, and joining us today on my far left, we have Bob Leach, who's, of course, with the Ross County Service Council, and local author, Melody Lapczynski Hatfield. She's also a historian, as is Bob. We're going to be talking about something that they were visiting with us about 9 months ago concerning a military tribute museum. Well, it's getting a little bit closer to becoming a reality. We're going to talk about that. Our sponsor for today's interview is Classic Brands. Back with more after this.
Are you looking for a beer that satisfies your thirst and love of country? Armed Forces Brewing Company brews beer for patriots. Celebrate freedom with every sip. Armed Forces Brewing Company. Freedom never tasted so good.
We're back with Bob and also Melody. Several months back, you guys were visiting with Dan about this concept of a military tribute museum. You visited recently with Chillicothe City Council, where I believe they had a non-binding resolution of support. So where are we now as far as maybe even having a location for this museum?
Well, the non-binding letter of support is huge, because it is saying that they are agreeing to the concept of putting a military museum in the Park Street Water Building that sits adjacent to the Veterans Memorial Park. Mm-hmm. So by them doing this letter of support, we are now in a position where we can actively pursue monetary donations and grant monies that are available, because up until this time we weren't able to do anything with grants since we do not own the property, only the owner of the property can do it. Mm-hmm. But with the letter of support, that is going to enable us to start doing that. And that brings us one step closer to getting a legislative action passed at City Council, actually moving the property from the city over to the Chillicothe Improvement Corporation, which is the holding entity that can rent properties. The city that directly can't rent properties. Mm-hmm. It has to go through the Chillicothe Improvement Corporation. So this takes us a step closer to that next move that we would be making.
Of course, with dealing with government, it's a if I can use the term crapshoot sometimes as to when things will happen. But I gathered that you're excited about getting this far, at least.
Absolutely. And you know what? That's why it's been 9 months since we've been here the last time. Sometimes
maybe as painful as birthing a baby.
Yeah, it is. But City Council has been wonderful with this. They have been absolutely wonderful. I can't overstate how good they have been. Lisa Bennett took it into committee, and she wants to move this along. Kevin Shoemaker has been wonderful in the process of moving this along, and my husband's probably getting tired of hearing me say this, but it's like when we were at City Council and Lisa made the motion and Mr. Shoemaker took it and then said, okay, do I have a second? Every single person in council, they didn't just put up their hand like this. They were like, we'll second it. And I don't know who ended up seconding it, if they named somebody or if they just said the room in general.
Might have been unanimous.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
And I would like to add that the fact that we are this far, this quickly, dealing with the government, we're very pleased with that. We thought maybe it would be a process that would take years. Mm-hmm. And within less than a year, we have this letter of support that's going to allow us to take this next big step in getting some major financial grants that we have to do now, because we're dealing with an old building. First thing we're going to need is a building inspector to come in and get a good look at the building, and then an architect to figure out how we can convert what's been used for many years as a service department for the city, for the water service, and change that into a museum structure.
Yeah.
Where do all of and Bob brought some things that we can see here. Where do all of these kinds of these are not replicas. These are actual instruments of, I think I see a dagger there, Bob. Is that what that is?
This is a bayonet, so we'll start for some of the most recent ones. My cousin brought this back from Iraq, so it was formerly the possession of an Iraqi soldier. And the fact that I said my cousin, we were looking for local connections. Somebody asked me, would we rather have the uniform that Norman Schwarzkopf wore in Desert Storm or the uniform of Bill Marsh, who's a local individual who graduated from Paint Valley, who went over and supported Operation Desert Storm. And we would rather have the local item that is connected to our community than something of national prominence.
Right.
So that is, this would be an example of the kind of thing we might have about that. We are not quite at the point, because we don't actually even officially own the building, to be taking donations yet. But if there is something that's perishable that the family plans to dispose of and sell on eBay or something, but would rather donate it, we already have the paperwork made for a deed of transfer. And we've got an agreement with the Ross County Historical Society for temporary storage of things if we have to get things that are perishable that might not be available a year from now. But right now, we just like members of our audience to consider things that you might have that are related to the military in the local area that you would be willing to donate to the museum.
What are some of these other things?
Okay, well, we'll go on. Well, let's go back. We talked about Iraq, Desert Storm. Every Vietnam veteran will remember the sea rations that we had. And all of the small cans that you got, that was dinner time for many of the veterans of Vietnam. And those are the kind of things that show the personal touch, the personal side of warfare. And then we go back to the Second World War. Of course, Chester Collins was a member of our community for many years. I mean, we miss him a lot. But he wrote this book about his experiences on the USS Dorothea Dix. And so this is the kind of item that has a local tie. And on the subject of World War II, this service pennant was hanging in the Bourneville Presbyterian Church before it closed down, one of many of members of their congregation who are off serving. Of course, this is a Blue Star pennant. That means somebody who was serving was still alive. If somebody lost their lives during the war, of course, the star was a Gold Star, and that's how you get the organizations called the Gold Star Wives, the Gold Star Mothers, and so on. And then we'll go continue on back. One of the most important things our museum is going to highlight our community's tie to World War I, to Camp Sherman. Of course, we had Camp Sherman days just 7 years ago in 2017 when that turned 100 years old. And so we will have some items and feature Camp Sherman. Although, of course, there are other museums in the area that we're not competing with, but that we are helping to highlight. The Ross County Museum has the Camp Sherman room. There's the Mace House out on the VA property that focuses on that. Even the National Guard's Camp Sherman Readiness Training Center has a display of some Camp Sherman items.
Is that an actual pennant?
Yes,
from
this
the
would
camp?
have been bought at one of the post exchanges during World War I by some soldier who probably sent it home to have displayed in his bedroom while he was away.
So that's over 100 years old.
Yes, sir. And then the oldest artifact I brought today, this telescope is belonged to an artillery lieutenant named Lieutenant Muhlenberg, who was in the 5th U.S. Artillery, and that battery was located near where the 73rd Ohio Infantry was at Gettysburg.
Wow.
And this was likely at Gettysburg, although there's no thing to prove it, but it would have been with his items in a wagon or maybe even with him. And then it does have his name engraved on it. It was presented to him before the war when he graduated from West Point. And so likely was near the Chillicothe soldiers, the Ross County soldiers who were at Gettysburg. So these are the kind of things that we'll want to highlight in the Chillicothe Ross Military Tribute Museum.
You talked about authentication. I watched just enough of like some of these antique shows to be dangerous on TV. Is that always possible to have something inscribed on something that authenticates it?
It's not always possible, but if you have a oral history, and we get something from a resident of Chillicothe that does tie it to Ross County, we would be interested in having that on display. Actual pedigree items, like you said, the antique shows, it makes the difference in thousands of dollars on an appraisal if you can definitively prove that. There's nothing on here that says it came from the Presbyterian Church in Bourneville, but when the church closed down, some of their items were auctioned off, and that's where we obtained this. The pedigree is not something that's as important to us as the story and the connection. Right next to this museum are the monuments that have the names of the 321 soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that we've lost in the various wars. And so we hope this museum will highlight their stories.
Yeah.
Melody, when you have written some of your books, what are some ways that you have been able to research background to gather all of that? I mean, where do you go for that kind of information?
Google knows everything. It's a starting point. Yeah. No, I mean, my books are different because they deal with people, so I go right to the source. The Carlisle building was the history of, but then it was something entirely different from this, because when I was doing the Carlisle building, I was going through the archives locally and things like that, and the Ohio Military Hall of Fame was based on, and for the most part, on stories of individuals. But the thing is those stories of individuals are exactly what we're doing here, because sometime today when we leave, I'm going to be picking up a bring back firearm that somebody's family member brought back. I don't remember if he said it was World War I or World War II. But the thing is that we will then have that lineage with that, because the person that's giving it to me for the museum is a relative, and we can get a history that way. We've had somebody that's going to be donating the flag that a service member's family received at the time that they were buried, and we've got personal information about that person, and even down to including a baby picture of the person, and being able to go back and do the history of when they get a hold of their DD-214, so we can find that's to answer one of your questions, the DD-214, but that we would be able to go back in, see where they actually served, what medals they received, things like that, and then you can go from there. It's like you tug on one little string, and it's hopefully like a half a dozen other threads will open up that you can pull.
So these are just some examples of when this museum becomes a reality, that they'll be looking for people in the community that might have a donation that they can make. So at this point, with what we've already announced at the beginning of the show, what do we need from the general public to help move this ball down the field?
Word of mouth, most definitely. And Bob and I have been definitely trying to do that as much as possible, because, boy, you get me started talking about this, and you're lucky if you can walk away like an hour later. But word of mouth is the most important, although I have to say we have had tremendous support from all avenues of the community, which is a very good thing. Then in addition to that, we also, like Bob said, are going to be looking to see if we can come up with items that would be lost if they weren't donated. So we want to keep that in the back of people's minds, that, if you have a relative that has something that you're afraid would be lost, please, talk to the relative, and then please contact us. Also, funding is going to be huge for us, because this building is going to require a lot of renovation to be able to use it by the time we get the structure the way that we need it, the interior the way that we need it, so that we can preserve these items. Whether that involves climate control or whatever, we need to be able to do that. And that obviously is going to cost a lot of money. And even though we're getting a lease from the CIC for this, it's still they're not going to foot the cost for any of this. So there's going to be a lot of money involved in that.
And I'd like to add, we have a logo that is being developed now, and let's use the Ross County Fair as a hallmark time. That will be when we will have brochures available at the table that's run by the Veterans Service Office and the local veterans clubs. And once we get this logo, Melody and I will have business cards that we'll be able to give out, and that'll give addresses, web addresses and things like that people can make the donation. Because in addition to the large grants from some of the major foundations, this museum will be able to exist with the $5 and $10 donations from the members of the community.
Absolutely.
So we will be happy to take anything like that.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
by the 1st of August, we will be completely set up with literature available for people to be able to make those kind of donations to us.
And the company that's doing our logo for us, Mill City, up on Water Street, they do an amazing job. When I walked through there initially, I couldn't believe all the things that they had at their disposal, and they have been absolutely great. So they're not only doing the logo for us, they're going to develop a website for us so that we can get more of a presence out in the community. It will be a very, very nice thing that they're doing.
Where will you be set up, Bob, at the fair, Ross County Fair, so people can look you up?
Yes, it's in the large building with the, it's not the commercial building, it's the one next to it, with all of the displays set up by various organizations and businesses. The Veteran Service table is right across from the VA hospital table. And so anybody who goes through there, a lot of times the youth will go through with a large plastic bag to get all the school supplies and things they'll need for the coming year. So that's I think it's called the agricultural building that they have plans to renovate and replace in the next few years. So one of the other things that we're really looking forward to, in Chillicothe, Ross County, this museum will start with the Revolution, because that's in our DNA. The first settlers here were veterans of the Revolution, and it'll cover everything else. And we have people from Ross County, either who lost their lives during these conflicts or who came back and lived as veterans. Every major historical event, we have people that were there, eyewitnesses to it. Some people remember reading the Gazette article. We recently passed the 80th anniversary of D-Day. We had 3 people from the county who lost their lives that day, and several others from the county who survived that day and came home and lived out their lives here. And that's just one of many examples of all of the parts of American history, American military history, that Ross County had somebody there front and center.
One other thing about the donations, Bob, and this came to me as you guys were talking about it. From time to time, we read or hear of stories where someone finds something in their attic, in their basement, somewhere in their home, and they don't know what it is. Unfortunately, sometimes it's ammunition that could be dangerous. But what if they find something like a telescope and it's been there for years and they think, I have no idea what that is. Is there someone that can identify that?
Well, once we get this museum started, we plan on being published hours that will be set every day. We're working some deals with some of our local veterans organizations and other organizations to support this on a full-time basis, so that we will always have a docent there on site. And if that person doesn't know, they can get a photograph of it or leave it for a temporary time and give us a chance to reach some experts from the various conflicts to find that. And yes, we are aware if it looks like it's ammunition. We have stories in the community where the police have had to contact explosive ordnance disposal individuals to dispose of a mortar round that was brought back from World War II, and the widow had no idea it was in her husband's file cabinet, and it was found years later.
Now, why you'd want to bring that back? That would be dangerous, I would think.
Yeah, but it was a different time then. And I wanted to take a moment, too, to say something. You know, when you ask, how do you find out? And I pointed to him. We have an amazing asset with retired Colonel Robert Leach. I mean, anything and everything military. He is the font of all knowledge. He is just absolutely amazing. And retired colonel, I don't think that gets said enough.
Right.
And one other thing to go along with that, too, is when we're talking about, when Bob was talking about the things that you don't really think about normally, that you don't normally think about. And the fact that these people were on D-Day, then they came back, or they died, or they were wherever they served, you don't really realize what makes up that person, that they did the things that they did. They were absolutely amazing people. And whether they came back whole, whether they came back not quite whole, or whether they came back with PTSD, whatever, they did amazing deeds, and those things need to be recognized. And I think it's so easy to forget about stuff like that, and it should never be forgotten.
Absolutely.
And I'm wearing my uniform for the Ross County Veterans Honor Guard, do the funerals for our local veterans who pass away. And this museum, it's all about honoring our veterans.
Absolutely.
And everything I can do to further the honor to our veterans is clearly well worth any time that I put into it.
If someone would like to get information from you, or how can they help, how can they donate, what's the contact information?
Well, we have been giving out our contact information because right now we do not have, actually, obviously, the property. So you can get a hold of me at 740-703-9957, or you can send me an email at melodyhatfield13@gmail.com. Before Bob gives his, I also want to say that we have a post office box. So if anybody were inclined to send us a donation or an inquiry or whatever the case may be, you can send that to the Chillicothe Ross Military Tribute Museum, P.O. Box 1003, 1003, Chillicothe, Ohio 45601.
Okay, and I will just use, because I call it an answering service, the Ross County Veterans Service Office, 774-1600. Has employees that are there all through business hours, and the Veterans of Foreign Wars Post 108, 772-1939, has an employee that would answer the phone all the way until midnight most nights, and can take any message that will get to me.
And any donation is tax deductible?
It is, absolutely. We are a 501c3 organization, and if you send us a donation, we will send you a thank you letter back with a reminder on the bottom. Please keep this for your records because it's tax deductible.
Very good. Well, we salute both of you and the ones that are working with you to help try to make this museum possible. I look forward to it opening because I love history.
Yeah, I'd like to point out the other members of the board that weren't here to make this interview a little easier. We have Jan Corzine, Mike Ader, and also Bob Barnhart.
Jonna Pulver.
And Jonna Pulver have been doing instrumental work in moving this forward.
And Greg Miles.
Okay.
Greg Miles.
Half of them sound like they were judges at one time.
Very handy.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate your being here to update us on that. And as this story unfolds further down the road, we'll get further updates at a future date.
Thank you so very much. We really appreciate it.
These are regulars here, friends. Melody Lapczynski, Hatfield, and also Bob Leach talking about the Ross County Military Tribute Museum that's moving down the field, hopefully towards the goal line. Our interview today brought to you by Classic Brands. For Litter Media Live Special Edition, I'm Mike Smith.